J'ai essayé de refaire 500 ans d'histoire.
So I had to recreate 500 years of history to get to the point where I could then move forward.
Well, and that's really the nub of it, isn't it? We, in some ways, we are insecure about the fact that we're such a young place, I think, and we're maybe don't have the history and don't have the heritage. We've gotten, as I say, we've gotten rid of a lot of our heritage, and so it's hard to go forward if you don't have that as your base. And I think that's part of our difficulty.
Something is very important, you know. If you want culture in flesh, you know what I mean, in reality, in presence, you need to be able to know history, to critique history, to rebuild every day the history, because we are living on cliché and sometimes a lot of errors and mistakes and more lies. And a first role of action in culture is to be able to make this link between history and future. Because the only way to see the future is to be able to critique the past, you know, but to know the past. Because what was very strange for me when I came in Quebec and in Canada too, but first I started by knowing and learning the history of Quebec, because it was a natural way for me, I mean, a natural historical way to go from France to Quebec and then to Canada. And it's strange in one life, less in one life, to make this history, to go through this history, to travel this history in my mind, in my body, and in flesh, on the road, you know. And what was a surprise for me, it was the very weak knowledge of history in Quebec and in Canada too. I mean, there is a weakness in the learning and the teaching of history. And that's very important, because there is no culture without that, you know. When I mean history, it means history from the beginning we know, you know, from the First Nation till now, and every contradiction in this history, to be able as country to accept the history, the contradiction in the history, but the reality of the history. If not, we are living sitting on illusions, you know. And it's strange, because there is a lot of solitudes, I mean social solitude and political solitude in this country, which are linked overall on the ignorance of the reality of the history. So it's a cliche. And I could precise, you know, because I was very close to that. And I think one of the job of people making theater, making film, making books and things like that, is to explore future by exploring the past too, you know, and to try to put the history on its legs, you know, and because it's a source of inspiration, but critical history, sure. It's not only to illustrate cliché, you know. There is some part of the history which are des zones interdites, you know.
No-go zones.
It's strange, you know. Because I was naive enough, I made a film about this part of history, which were this no-go zone, you know.
What was that?
And that's very important, you know. We have to.
Which film, you know?
Yeah. What project was that?
C'était quel film que vous avez fait sur
for
ces zones
example,
interdites?
one of my films which was used to make a false controversy, you know, called in French, La Liberté en colère, freedom outrage, you know, made with the FLQ, you know. It was crazy, you know, because it was a story, you know. It's a part of the history. There is no controversy. If there is a controversy, it's a social controversy. It's a fight with the history, not a fight with me, you know. Huh? And that's a problem, you know, and a very interesting problem as issue for artists here, you know, for culture too, in flesh, for culture. But there is no culture without history. But when culture in a country is called heritage, oh, we have to think about that.
Yeah.
There is a problem, you know.
Yeah, I think
It's very difficult to have a minister of culture called heritage. For me, it's a semantic problem, not a political problem, you know, because I am apolitical. But I think that's a problem.
I think we have a question.
Hi there, I'm Finn, and really enjoying this fluidic conversation, and I guess that's one of the main things I'm walking away from this is sort of a fluidic perspective on culture and the interchange between society and culture and the mass media. And I've already forgotten what my original question was, but because it's so fluidic, but I find there's a sense in which Calgary is ossified in terms of it clamps down on the necessary environment in which you can have these exchanges. There was a case recently where they had the Arbor Lake. I'm sure a lot of people know they made the front yard into a wheat field or something like that, and now they're being charged by the bylaw officers, and there's opposition from the community. That seems to be a very stultifying environment in which to operate as an artist. In fact, it doesn't allow creativity to percolate. Now, what kind of leadership to me would be we always talk about moving forward and stuff like that as sort of a train going down the tracks. But I guess my interpretation of leadership would be to help create an environment where it's sort of there's more oil in the gears, you can move more quickly. And what form would that kind of leadership take?
Who would like to answer?
It's a question for you. You know, I took some risk. You have to take a risk.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if I could just clarify, it's hard to hear up here actually for me a little bit, but you're speaking about the notion of barriers that sometimes are put in the way of artists, am I correct? In terms of being able to do their work and the community at large facilitating and accepting those kinds of things? Would that be?
Barriers both ways, though. There's also a dialectic is a dialectic, and it happens both ways. The artist community has its own faults, which prevent dialogue, and the rest of the community, it happens both ways. So it's not just a one-way street. But yes, ultimately that would be the question.
Well, I'll take my stab at that. I mean, when actually we were talking about this earlier today in terms of oppositional elements, and you've alluded to this in your talk tonight, Excellency, that I have a belief that actually it's good to have oppositional elements with regard to arts and culture. That everything actually resolves at a higher level because of the sort of bumping up against things that artists and the community, the broader community, have to engage in. That's my own particular view of things. So that I don't actually view conflict, and when I say conflict, I mean non-antagonistic conflict, in the sense of barriers. I don't actually view those things as very negative. In fact, I think they're really important for institutions and communities to move forward. It's the resolution of conflict. So, I mean, on one hand, it's not good to say that there's a particular kind of bureaucratic barrier to artists doing their work, and I would never argue for that. On the other hand, I think it's actually a very interesting dynamic that happens, because artists do react to what's there already, and to some extent. And I'm sure that gets to your question exactly, but that's my piece of that. Maybe, Michael, you...
Well, and